Hi, I'm creating this video as a demonstration to show off my Settlers of Catan Starcraft 2 map. Now this map is still a work in progress, but all of the major gameplay features from Settlers of Catan are implemented, so I thought I would make this just to see what people thought. So, as you can see, the map is pretty bare at this point. That's because almost everything in the game is created through triggers, and anything that's not at this point will be in the final version. If you'd like to see some of my triggers, here are a few of them. As you can see, it's a pretty complex system with a lot of different variables and triggers doing a lot of different things. So as such, it would take a while to explain everything. But I can still show you everything I've done and upload this map at a later point if you would like. So why don't we go into in-game and see a little of it in action. So we are now in-game, and as you can see, the graphics are not really the best. All of these models are simply temporary models that I'm using while testing, and the final release will have a number of custom models and textures imported to make the game look more like Catan. On top of that, the interface you're seeing right now is also a temporary interface and is meant solely for debug purposes. The final game will have a more user-friendly interface that allows both new and old players of Catan to understand what they're doing. Speaking of the interface, why don't I give you a brief introduction of what everything here does. So on this side, we have all of my gameplay information. This top box allows me to see how many resources any given player has, with brick, cattle or sheep, ore, wheat, and wood. And each of these columns represents one of the players. This is the first player, this is the second player, this is the third, and this is the fourth. This second dialogue allows me to do a similar thing with my development cards, with the Knight, Road Building, Year of Plenty, Monopoly, and Victory. And again, the columns represent the player. So we have player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4. Finally, we have this dialogue which allows me to see the victory points of each player, with each row representing a player. So player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4. On the opposite side of the screen, we have the dialogues that allow me to actually control what is going on in the game. This first dialogue allows me to manipulate which player is considered active at any given time, or which player, or which turn it is. So, if I press any of these buttons, it will change that and allow me to act and build things as a different player. Below that, we have a dialogue which allows me to define what action the player I'm playing as is doing at any given moment. So none is the default, but I can also build settlements, turn settlements into cities, build roads, purchase development cards, or move the thief. Below that, we have a dialogue which allows me to roll the dice, and whenever I click this button, the dice are rolled. So I got a 3 and a 5, or an 8. Under that, we have the Use Dev Card button, which allows you to use a development card by opening this window. Each of these buttons represents any development cards that you might have. Now, since I have no development cards, I obviously can't use any of these buttons, so they're all grayed out. You will also notice that anytime I hover over one of the buttons, it gives me the text of that development card. So if I'm a newer player or don't have as much experience, I'll know exactly what any given development card does. Finally, we have the Trade Resources panel, which allows me to trade resources between players and send resources to ports so I can receive resources back from the bank. So this panel is separated into two parts, Trade to Players and Trade to Bank/Ports. Trade to Players is pretty straightforward. You select the amount of any given resource that you want to give to the player you're sending them to, and then you select the player to send them to. Just like in the board game, you have no control over the other player's resources, so you must rely on them to give you the resources you've requested in return. I'm not sure if this is how the system will be structured in the final version, but for now, this is fine. In the Trade to Bank dialog, you're able to select what resources you want to trade in for any other resource. So This information right here represents your current trading rate for the desired resource. And anytime you build a settlement at a port, this rate will decrease accordingly. If I had enough cattle available to trade for the brick, these buttons would be highlighted and would allow me to perform said trade. Now that I've shown you how the interface works, I'm going to show you a little bit of how I've implemented the gameplay. The first thing I'm going to have to do is build some settlements so I can gather resources. At this time, settlements have no resource requirements, but that's simply because I have not implemented starting resources, so it would make it impossible for me to continue if I did have the settlement costs there. In the final version, the settlements will cost the same as they normally would. So the first thing you'll notice when I build a settlement is that when I click settlement, all of these little X's pop up to show me where I can build settlements. So I'm going to build one right here because it's between a 6 and an 8, which is a great point. Now you'll also notice that if I attempt to build a settlement too close to the already built settlement, it won't let me, because as the rules state, you can't build a settlement less than 2 away from any existing settlement. So I'm going to build a few more settlements, and then I'm going to show you resource gathering. You'll also notice that for every settlement I build, I gain a victory point, like I would in the actual game. And finally, if I build near a port, which is represented by a treasure chest, you'll notice that my trading values are adjusted accordingly. So, I'm going to build one more settlement for player 1, and now I'm going to build some settlements for the other players. So now, all of the players have settlements. So I'm ready to start gathering resources. So I'm going to roll the dice, and I got a 7, which obviously doesn't yield any resources. And another 7. And another 7. There we go. I got a 5, which yielded a brick and 2 wood for player 4. As we can see here, a brick and 2 wood. So I'm going to roll the dice a couple more times to give each of the players a nice hefty amount of resources to play with. Okay, now we can see that each of the players has a good amount of resources. So the first thing that I want to do with my resources is try and build a city. So, as player 1, I'm going to select city and click on one of my settlements. And boom, now I have a city. And you can see that my victory points increased accordingly. Now, beyond a city, I also want some roads. So I'm going to select road, and just like with settlements, all of the valid points show up. And I'm going to build a road right here. Perfect. So now I have a city and a road coming from my city. Aside from that, though, I could also purchase a development card. So now I have Monopoly. So why don't I use it to see how that'll work? So I select Monopoly because it's valid, and Monopoly says if you play this card, you must choose one resource type. All other players must then give you all of their copies of that resource card. If a player has none of the specified resource, they do nothing. So just like in the game, I select Monopoly, and then which resource would I like? So I notice that player 3 or player 4 has a lot of brick, and player 2 also has some brick. So I'm going to select brick to grab that from them. And now I have 11. So now I'm also going to do a little resource trading. Now I feel really bad about all the brick that I just took from player 4. So I'm going to give him a little bit of that brick back. Maybe 3. And if you watch the resource counter, you'll see it transfer accordingly. Awesome. So now I have 8 and he has 3, just like I should. On top of that, though, I don't really need all the wood that I have. So I'm going to trade some of my wood in for something that I have a little less of, like cattle. So I make one trade, boom. I think I only really need 2 wood, so I'm going to make another trade in. Boom, works perfectly. So as you can see, all the trading works, but I'm going to show a little more development cards. So purchase 1, purchase 2. Perfect. So now I have some knights, some monopolies, and a victory point. So if I use victory point, it increases perfectly. And if I use knight, now I get to move the thief. So the thief or the robber works exactly the same as it does in the real game. If I move it to a location, that location can no longer produce anything, and I can steal from the people at that location. So I'm going to move it here so that I can steal from player 2 and prevent him from producing this cattle. So you'll notice that there's 3 buttons, 2, 3, and 4, for the 3 players that I would be able to steal from. If I were player 2, they would be 1, 3, and 4. Player 3, 1, 2, and 4. And player 4, 1, 3, and 1, 2, and 3. So I could make the choice to not steal, but I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? I'm going to take something from player 2. When I press this, it's going to choose a resource at random to give me, and it'll just make the transfer immediately. In the final game, it'll give you the information on what resource was chosen and that the transfer was made, but for now, since this is just the debug, it'll happen automatically. So you'll notice I took one of his ore. Perfect. So now that I've showed you pretty much all the gameplay functionality, I'm just going to roll the dice a bunch of times, purchase the rest of the development cards so I can show how all of them work. So now I'll purchase some development cards, and now I have road building and year of plenty. So I'm going to go to use development card, and I'm going to use road building, and like road building does in the actual game, it allows me to build 2 roads. So I'm going to build one here, and one here. Perfect. And then I'll go to use Year of Plenty. Year of Plenty allows me to select 2 resources that I want from the bank, one of each. So I'm really low on wheat, so I'm going to select wheat. And I'd really prefer more cattle, so I'll select cattle. So as I said, all of the gameplay functionality is in place. At this point, all I have to do is add the system that allows turns to be used, so that not every player can activate anything at any given time, and so that it works like the actual game does. That shouldn't take me too long, and will probably be up in the next week, but just in case, I thought I would release this to let people know what I was doing. I know there have been a lot of attempts to make Catan before, or at least a couple, and none of them have really gone that well. So I thought I would put this out there to see what people thought. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and have a great day.